I've been a retired nurse for 6 years now, and I thought I knew what it felt like to be invisible. 32 years in emergency care at Vancouver General will do that to you. You learn to shrink yourself, to move quietly through chaos, to hold everything together while no one notices you doing it. But nothing in those 32 years prepared me for the moment my son leaned close to my ear in the arrivals hall of Calgary International Airport and whispered, so quietly I almost thought I'd misheard him, "Mum, while you're here, please don't tell anyone at the complex that you're my mother. Just say you're an old family friend visiting from the coast." I had a carry-on in one hand and a tin of butter shortbread I'd baked the night before in the other. I stood there with the tin and the bag and the smell of airport coffee all around me, and I looked at my son, this 41-year-old man I had held in a hospital room in North Vancouver on a February night in 1983, and I said, very calmly, "I beg your pardon?" He smiled in that way he has, the way that used to charm his teachers and later his managers and apparently now his neighbors, and he said, "It's just easier, Mum. Simone has a certain image. In the building. You know how it is." I did not know how it was. But I picked up my carry-on, and I followed him to the parkade, and I said nothing more about it. Not then. That was the first mistake people would say I made. I've heard it said before, by people who have never been that mother in that arrivals hall, that the correct thing to do is speak up immediately. Draw the line. Refuse. And perhaps they're right. But there is something that happens to you in that moment that is very difficult to explain unless you've lived it, a kind of short-circuiting. Your brain simply refuses to process what it has just received. It files it under surely not and keeps walking. So I walked. I should tell you a little about how I came to be in that Calgary parkade in the first place. My son, I'll call him by his name, which is Colin, married Simone 4 years ago. Simone is 34, a commercial real estate agent, and she grew up in a neighborhood in West Vancouver where people had boats, not sailboats, motor yachts, the kind with names painted in gold script on the hull. Her parents are lovely in the way that people can be lovely when they have never, not once in their adult lives, experienced financial worry. They are generous in the way that comes easily, writing checks, upgrading flights, arriving at restaurants, and simply handing over a card without looking at the bill. I am not that kind of generous. My generosity comes from a different place. It comes from 12-hour shifts and a thermos of coffee and choosing between a new furnace and a week at Cultus Lake and choosing the furnace. My husband Gerald died 8 years ago, a cardiac event as they call it, very sudden, at 61, and after that it was just me in the house in Port Coquitlam, living carefully, saving carefully, loving my son from a careful distance, because that is what he seemed to want. When Colin and Simone decided they wanted to buy a condominium in Calgary's Beltline neighborhood, I offered to help. Not because I had unlimited funds, because I had saved for 32 years, and because Colin is my only child, and because there is a particular kind of love that expresses itself in practical terms, when words no longer seem adequate. I contributed $85,000 toward their down payment. In Canada, that is not a small thing. It is the kind of contribution that requires forms and a gift letter for the mortgage lender and a very careful conversation with a financial advisor to make sure you are not leaving yourself without a safety net. I had that conversation. I signed the letter. The gift was unconditional, or so I said on paper. I want to be honest with you. Part of me believed that money carried a quiet message, not a price tag on my love, but a statement of value, of how much I believed in them, of how much I hoped to remain in some small way, central to their lives. Colin and Simone had been in the condo for 14 months when they called to say they had signed a lease on a house in Killarney, a proper house, detached, with a small yard and a garage, and that they were pregnant. I cried for an hour after that call, entirely from joy. The baby, a girl named Lily, arrived 7 months before my visit. Lily was the reason I booked the flight. Lily, and a particular kind of loneliness that had been accumulating since December, when the Christmas video call lasted 11 minutes before Simone said they had plans with her family and the screen went dark. I had seen Lily only on FaceTime. I had sent packages a hand-knit blanket in pale yellow, a set of board books in both English and French because I believe in that, a white noise machine because I know what sleep deprivation does to a new mother. Each package acknowledged with a brief text, "Got it, thanks, Mum." No photo of Lily with the blanket, no FaceTime showing her with the books. Just, "Got it, thanks, Mum." So when Colin called in March and said Simone had a long weekend and maybe I could come for a visit, I said yes before he finished the sentence. I baked the shortbread. I packed a bag. I flew to Calgary on a Thursday morning with a window seat and a heart so full I had to breathe slowly to keep it from spilling. And then came the arrivals hall. Colin drove a different route home than I expected, through streets I didn't recognize, and he talked the whole way about the neighborhood, the coffee shop on the corner, the fact that parking was easier than people said. He talked the way people talk when they are uncomfortable and filling silence. I watched the city slide past the window and I held the shortbread tin in my lap and I thought, just say it's not what it sounded like. Say you misspoke. Say anything. He didn't say anything. He pulled into the driveway of a tidy gray house on a quiet street and carried my bag to the front door, and the door opened and there was Simone holding Lily on her hip. Lily had Colin's nose and dark eyes that hadn't quite decided what color they were going to be. She looked at me with that particular gravity babies have, that sense of weighing you, and then she reached out one small hand and grabbed my finger and I thought, there is the reason I am here. Simone smiled and stepped back to let me in. "Ruth," she said. "Good flight?" "Lovely," I said. "She's beautiful, Simone. She has her moments." Simone passed her to Colin and picked up my carry-on from the doorstep, which surprised me. "Come see what we've done with the place." The house was beautiful. I want to give credit where it is due. Simone has a very good eye-warm colors, clean lines, not a piece of furniture that didn't belong. Photos on the sideboard, Colin and Simone at what looked like a Banff resort, Simone's parents at a garden party, Lily's newborn photos in matching frames. I looked for a photo that included me, something from a visit or a holiday, and I didn't find one, but I told myself that didn't mean anything. The guest room was at the back of the house, small but nicely done, with a new duvet and a candle on the nightstand. I set my things down and washed my hands and came out to find Simone putting the kettle on. "We're having people over Saturday evening," she said without turning around. "Neighbors from across the street, the Hendersons, and a couple from Colin's office. Just casual, wine and cheese." "That sounds lovely," I said. "Colin probably mentioned," she said, and here she did turn around, with the particular expression of someone who is about to say something they have pre-packaged as reasonable. "We find it's just easier, socially, to keep things a bit simpler. With introductions, people in this neighborhood are a certain way. We don't want there to be any weirdness." There was that word again. Easier. "I'm not sure I follow," I said. She smiled. "Just you know. You're our guest. That's enough context, isn't it? You're an old family friend. People don't need your whole history." I put both hands around my mug of tea, and I said, "My whole history. You know what I mean." I did know what she meant. She meant that a 64-year-old retired nurse from Port Coquitlam, wearing a cardigan from Mountain Equipment Co-op and carrying homemade shortbread, did not fit the image they were constructing. She meant that my son's mother came with implications about where Colin came from, about the gap between his current address and his history, about the fact that his childhood home had laminate countertops and a second-hand sofa, and love in absolutely no short supply, but not a motor yacht. She meant I was a loose thread. I said nothing. I drank my tea. Friday passed quietly. Colin went to work. Simone took Lily to a playgroup. I sat in the kitchen with a book and fed the parking meter of my own thoughts. In the afternoon, Simone came home and said a few of the neighbors were gathering at the park down the street and asked if I wanted to come along. I said yes. We walked over with Lily in the stroller and I was introduced by Simone to 3 other young mothers as Ruth, an old friend of the family, just visiting from BC. One of the women, a warm person named Kezia, asked me what part of BC, and we talked for 10 minutes about the Fraser Valley and whether Chilliwack had gotten too expensive and where to find good dim sum in Richmond. She was genuinely lovely. I felt, in that conversation, briefly like a person again. On the walk back, I said to Simone casually, "Kezia seems wonderful." "She is," said Simone. "Her husband's in commercial development. They just got back from Portugal." There was nothing in that answer that was unkind, but there was something in it that clarified the terms of engagement. These were people who went to Portugal, and I was a person who took the early morning WestJet fare and brought shortbread in a tin. Saturday evening arrived. I helped in the kitchen I offered, and Simone accepted, though with the particular acceptance of someone who would have preferred to decline. I made a spinach dip because I know it travels well on a cracker and people always eat it. Simone arranged a charcuterie board that probably cost $60. The Hendersons arrived first, David and Patricia, mid-40s, both in tech, 2 kids in hockey. Then Colin's colleague James and his partner Michelle, both in their mid-30s, Michelle expecting her first. They were all perfectly nice. They talked about the Flames and the Stampede and whether the LRT expansion was ever going to happen and the prices of things, which is a topic that never gets old in Canada. And I sat on the periphery and smiled and answered when spoken to, and every time the question, "So how do you two know each other?" came up, I said, "Oh, I've known the family a long time," and I watched Colin across the room not look at me, and I felt something settle in my chest like a stone finding the bottom. It was Michelle who cracked something open without meaning to. She was sitting beside me while the others were refilling glasses, her hand resting on her stomach in that unconscious way pregnant women have, and she said, "Do you have kids?" I looked at her. This young woman with her whole life arranged ahead of her, waiting for her, and I said, "I have a son." "Oh, how wonderful." "How old?" 41. She smiled. "My mother is already planning what she's going to knit." "Are you close, you and your son?" I looked across the room at Colin, who was laughing at something David had said, tilted back on his heels, entirely comfortable. "We're working on it," I said. I excused myself and went to the kitchen and stood at the sink and ran the cold water over my wrists, the way I used to in the emergency department, when a shift had become too much to carry. It was an old trick. It worked then. It worked now. I thought about calling my friend Janet back in Port Coquitlam. I thought about what she would say, because I knew exactly what she would say, and it would begin with Ruth Ellen Morrison, "You get on that plane." But I didn't call Janet. I dried my hands and went back to the living room and sat down next to Kezia, who had arrived late with a bottle of Okanagan wine, and we talked about the wine for 10 minutes, and she said she'd been to the Naramata Bench the previous summer, and I said I'd been meaning to go for years, and she said I absolutely had to, and it was a perfectly ordinary conversation about wine, and it kept me anchored in the room. After the guests left, and Lily was in bed, and the kitchen was cleaned, I did most of it, quietly, because that is what I do. Colin found me in the guest room. I was sitting on the edge of the bed with my phone in my hand, not looking at it. He stood in the doorway and said, "Mum, yes, you were great tonight." I looked up at him. This man who had my husband's jaw and my father's stubbornness and something in the eyes that was entirely his own. "Colin," I said, "I'd like you to sit down." He sat in the chair by the window. "I'm going to say something, and I need you to hear me all the way through before you respond. Can you do that?" He nodded. "I know what I was asked to do this weekend," I said. "I know what I've been called. I know what name has and hasn't been used. I have been here for 3 days and I have not been introduced as your mother to a single person in your life. And I want you to understand something." I put the phone down on the nightstand. "I am not asking you to change Simone. I am not asking you to stage a scene or have an argument on my behalf. I am asking you, just you, my son, whether that felt right to you, whether it felt like something you could continue to feel right about." He didn't answer immediately. I gave him time. When he did speak, his voice was different, lower. "Simone grew up a certain way," he said. "Her parents are They have a specific world, and I've been trying to fit into that world, to give her the life what? The life she expected. I sat with that for a moment. Then I said, I understand that. I do, but what I need you to ask yourself is this: at what cost? He left the room without answering. I didn't sleep well. I lay in the dark in that small, tidy guest room, and I thought about the $85,000, and I thought about the yellow blanket, and I thought about Lily grabbing my finger, and I thought about Gerald, who would have had no difficulty whatsoever saying exactly what needed to be said within 30 seconds of arriving at that airport. Gerald never struggled with that. It was one of the things about him I found most difficult, and one of the things I now miss most acutely. The next morning was Sunday. I came out to find Colin making eggs and Lily in her high chair demolishing a piece of toast with remarkable dedication. Simone was still in bed. Colin handed me a coffee without being asked, which was something. I sat across from Lily, and she regarded me with that bottomless baby seriousness, and then blew a bubble, which I took as a positive sign. I've been thinking, Colin said, at the stove, back to me. So have I said. What you said last night. You don't have to respond to it right now. I mean it. Take your time. He turned around. I'm sorry, Mum. It was plain and direct, and I could see it cost him something. I know you are, I said. I don't have a good excuse. No. But you have a reason, and you've told me the reason, and I'm not going to pretend I don't understand it. You've been trying to build something that feels stable, and I've been a reminder of something that makes that feel less stable. I get that. I do. I wrapped both hands around the mug. But Colin, you have a daughter. You have Lily. And she is going to know who her grandmother is. Not an old family friend, her grandmother. And you are going to have to decide whether you want her to grow up watching you be ashamed of where you came from, or whether you want her to grow up knowing that where you came from was full of love. He didn't say anything for a while. The eggs got a little overdone. He didn't seem to notice. Lily threw a piece of toast on the floor and studied the results with great scientific interest. Simone appeared around 11 in an oversized sweater, quieter than usual. She made herself a coffee and leaned against the counter, and I had the impression, from something in her body, that she had been awake some of the same hours I had. After a moment she said, My mother thinks I'm too hard on people sometimes. I looked at her. Does she? She said it to me years ago, and I've never forgotten it, mostly because I know she's right and I don't know how to fix it. I said nothing. She said, I didn't think about it, the way this weekend was set up. I just organized it the way I organize everything, into categories. What's useful? What complicates things? She looked at me with something that seemed, if not entirely remorse, at least an approach of it. You're his mother. That wasn't right. It wasn't an apology that arrived with fanfare. It was barely wrapped. But I have spent 32 years in emergency care, and I have learned that sometimes things come to you in the least expected packaging, and what matters is that they come. I said, Thank you for saying that. She nodded and took her coffee to the living room, and I heard her pick up Lily, and the baby made a sound of pure delight, and the morning continued. I flew home on the Tuesday. Colin drove me to the airport and carried my bag in and stood with me in the departures hall. Almost a mirror of Thursday, almost the same, except that this time when he leaned close, he said, I'll call more. I mean it. I kissed him on the cheek. I'll hold you to it. He hugged me in the way he hadn't since his father's funeral, the kind that uses both arms and says more than words can. And then I went through security, and I sat at my gate with a terrible airport coffee, and I called Janet. Well, she said before I could speak. It was complicated, I said. They always are. I said some things that needed saying. About time. Janet. I'm just saying. I looked out the window at the planes on the tarmac, silver in the April light, going everywhere and coming back. He apologized, I said. His wife apologized. Nobody did it perfectly, but they did it. And Lily? Lily grabbed my finger at the airport. There was a long pause. Ruth, said Janet. I know, I said. That's everything. Yes, I said. It really is. The flight home was 2 hours. I had a window seat again, and somewhere over the Rockies the clouds broke, and I could see the peaks below, white and absolute, the kind of landscape that makes you feel correctly small. I thought about what I had said to Colin, about Lily watching him, about what we teach our children not by what we say but by what we accept, about the particular courage it takes to say, simply, "This is not right," without rage and without theater, just steadily, as a statement of fact. I am 64 years old. I worked 32 years in emergency care, and I raised a son mostly on my own after Gerald died, and I drove a 2011 Civic until last year, when it became medically inadvisable, and I have never once in my life owned a boat of any kind. But I know who I am. I knew it in that arrivals hall, and I knew it in that kitchen, and I knew it every hour of that weekend when I was filed under a different name. I knew it when Lily grabbed my finger. I thought about Simone's mother saying she was too hard on people. I thought about how long that remark had stayed with Simone, how it had traveled with her across the years and surfaced, unexpectedly, on a quiet Sunday morning in a house on a street in Killarney. I thought about what I might say to Lily one day, when she is old enough to hear it, about the importance of knowing the difference between the life you perform and the life you actually have. I thought about baking more shortbread when I got home. The plane began its descent toward Vancouver. Below me, the Fraser River appeared, wide and brown and familiar, running the same route it has always run. To the west, the Pacific. To the north, the mountains. Everything in its correct place. I was going home, and somewhere in Calgary, in a gray house on a quiet street, my granddaughter was learning to sit up on her own, and a young couple was having, I hoped, a very long and very honest conversation. I buckled my seatbelt for landing and looked out at the city coming up to meet me, and I felt, more than anything, like myself. That, in the end, is the thing they cannot take from you. Not any of them, not ever. Not the cool introductions, or the careful omissions, or the categories you get quietly filed into. Yourself comes back. It always comes back. Lily, when you read this someday, and I intend to still be around when you can, your grandmother was in that house. She was there the whole time, and she loved every complicated minute of it.